Hey, it's Miguel from Singing Tree Flutes here. I wanted to share with you a cool flute I made, but I also wanted to talk to you about this flute and what it means to me and a little bit about my heritage. I get often asked, are you Native American or whatever? And I identify as a mixed race person, okay? I am European on my mother's side, and my father is full Puerto Rican. And so on the Puerto Rican side, we have um, Spanish, African, and Taino ancestry. Okay, and so my Native American heritage comes through my Boricua ancestry. Okay, so the word Boricua, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't, but in Puerto Rico, there's songs and things that talk about that or that mention that, but a lot of people in Puerto Rico, that's like a sort of a nickname. Rather than saying Puerto Riqueño, they might say Boricua, and they might say, "Tu eres Boricua," you're Puerto Rican, or you're Boricua. And Boricua, they got that word from the island of Borik'en. And so the Taino people called the island of Puerto Rico Borik'en, okay? And even in Puerto Rico, not a lot of people might really dig into their Taino roots, but most people in Puerto Rico have Taino ancestry. It's part of their bloodline, okay? And a lot of people are picking up their practices back again, and some were done underground in secret for, throughout, history without interruption. But a lot of people today are picking up those indigenous roots again, including myself. And Borik'en. So what I was going to say is most of Puerto Rico is definitely influenced, like that whole Latin American Puerto Rican culture, with their musical instruments, with their words, with their language, with their practices, even their sort of cultural values. It's all very influenced by the Taino people, also the African people, and the slave trade that went on back then too, because they all became like a unique culture of itself, with the intermixing of both the native, the African, and the Spanish cultures. Okay, which is the same throughout history, throughout the world. It's the same in Hawaii. It's the same, pretty much everywhere in the world. Okay, but anyway. So the Taino people, Borik'en was what they called the island. That's the land of the valiant and noble lord, okay? And that's why today Puerto Ricans call themselves Boricua, because they're the people of the island of Borik'en, okay? And so I created this flute for myself, but also for my cousin. That's how it started. I'm bad at making flutes for myself, but I decided I was going to make this flute for my cousin because we did a trade, and he actually runs a fitness business, and he gave me great discount on fitness equipment. And so I said, man, I'm going to make you a Boricua flute. And he actually says to me, he's like, well, it can't be a Boricua flute if you don't put the Puerto Rican flag on it. And of course, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I'm talking really about a Taino flute, like Boricua from way back. But so this is the flute stand I made him too. Had to put that Puerto Rican flag on there, the Boricua flag on there too. Anyway, a little side note. But yeah, this particular flute, I think, is the one I'm going to keep for myself. They both sound excellent and look really sweet, so it's hard to pick which one I want to keep and one I want to send to him, since his might just be a wall hanger. I'm sure he'll really love it and appreciate it. Anyway, so we got this thing here, and it's got all these Taino symbols. It's got the semi-god on here, and the semi is interesting if that's part of Taino culture. So, the Taino people, what they would do is they would carve these little figurines, and they would carve them in the forms or in the depictions of their ancestral spirits, right? Or, the spirits or their deities, their gods, the things that they would call to, And I think mainstream and or Christian culture has sort of skewed what that means. To me, it's not much more different than praying to one God, which in this case might be called Yaya, which this is right here we'll talk about represents. But but then how, you know, you might talk about like the Archangel Michael or things like that in the Christian culture. So, you know, these spirits are these deities, these different ones that come that represent different things, represent the moon, the sun, the water, the hurricane, you know, fertility, even different fruits and foods and things like that. Those represent different spirits, and the indigenous culture of America here is the same way. We talk about calling in the spirits or the spirits, and everything has spirit, and those spirits and the animals and the plants and things, we call on them for their attributes that they represent to us. Okay, so I'm sure that this is very similar amongst our people here, the Taino people. And so this semi-god here, this is the most popular semi. All the semis, the semi is also a general term for any of the figurines that they would carve. And so when they'd have a ceremony, they would set out all of these figurines that represented the different spirits, and they would say that was like sort of the conduit to call that spirit in, and that life of that spirit would enter that stone or whatever and be with the people for healing and for their prayers to be answered. Okay, so they created these semis, which can be found all over the island of Puerto Rico, for that very reason, to call in those spirits. And so I created my first semi here, and this is the three-pointed semi. It's a very common semi-god that they have there, and that right there, that represents the mountain of El Yunque, the rainforest in Puerto Rico. It's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful place for rainforest, and there's a lot of caves there. Okay, they say that the people, their creation stories, the Taino people, the creation stories say that they came from the caves. They also say that the sun came from the cave and it came out, and then it would go back into hiding, and then when the sun would go and hide, then the moon goddess would come out. Okay, like that. And so we have all over those caves that I would say they also had a bunch of petroglyphs, so I have that on here too. But before I go any further, keep talking about the three-pointed semi here. So we got Yaya, the great spirit, the creator God, right here on the top. It represents, maybe some people could call that the sky. This represents the earth, or the living, or the, you know, all of the earthly realm, everything that's alive and living. This here, this third point here would represent the spirit of the dead, not too different to you know, the indigenous people of Mexico and South America there, when they talk about the Day of the Dead and the way that they honor them, probably wasn't too different. But that represents like the spirit world or the underworld, they say. So that's the 3 points. We got the great spirit, you know, the creator. We got the living. We have the underworld or the spirit world here. Okay, and this here, this face here, that I think they call that Guabayana, and that would be the chief of the underworld. Okay, and so there's an actual deity or a spirit that they have that represented that you know, chief of the underworld. I think I understand that as how do you say that? Helping our ancestors help us in this world. You know what I mean? So like, you know, calling on that spirit of Guabayana to help bring our ancestors and the medicine of our ancestors to us in the living world. So that's pretty sweet. I love that carving there. And then, of course, these are the very classic petroglyphs that were found in the caves on the island of Puerto Rico. That's the sun god there. That's the coqui frog here. And then that's the moon goddess there. You know, and I talked about both of them. They all represent different things. Atabe, which can also be called the moon goddess, was the goddess of fertility, was the goddess of water, of life, you know, and that was one of the most popular, or the most popular, I guess, or most prayed to spirit that they would call in for their ceremonies and honor. which makes all the sense because that would be the goddess that would bring life and fertility to the land and to the people. Okay, so really, really cool, special flute to my heart, you know, knowing that that's from my people, you know, one of my people. And yeah, pretty sweet. And so some things that I'll share with you that you probably don't know about Taino. So did you know that the word hurricane, that comes from the Taino language? The word Taino actually means friend. So that wasn't the original name for the people of Borik'en. And I don't know for sure if it's Boricua either. I think that might be a new slang term that came from the word Borik'en, but don't quote me on that. But I know that Taino, the way that they started being called Taino, which if you looked at all Native American culture, it could be the same kind of story. Like we call people Chippewa when that was just because, you know, white people couldn't pronounce Ojibwe, or, you know, like that goes throughout history. Taino was when Christopher Columbus landed. And so, speaking of which, we're talking about Taino. Our indigenous people are the first people to have met Columbus, okay? And so when Columbus came over to the island of Haiti and that whole Caribbean area, that was, you know, the Taino people that they first met. And they were saying Taino, 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 meaning we're your friend. And then Columbus started telling everybody, these are the Taino people. That's how they adopted that name, Taino. And yeah, so anyway, the hurricane, that word comes from there. The maraca, that instrument, comes from the Taino people, and that word is also a Taino word. Canoe or canoa, barbacoa. Barbacoa was where we got the word barbecue from. All of these things that we just use today in our everyday language all stem from that first time of colonization. And when we, you know what I mean, we adopted these words from those original people that came here, and we use them in our language today. A lot of people don't know that. So that's just some interesting facts about some of my roots there. And so I hope that answers the question if people ask me if I'm Native American. And it's a really interesting thing, you know, about that, you know, about indigenous heritage, okay, and who claims what, and how much of this or that are you, and how much should you be to be able to say that you are that. And it's all of that stuff. The truth is we're all one people, but it is also like valuable and beautiful to look at your ancestry, look at where you come from, for a better understanding of yourself and how your people did things, you know, and why you're drawn to the things that you're drawn to. And for me, it makes sense. I'm a little bit displaced on my mother's side, meaning my mother had a lot of tragedy in her life, and she had a lot of, what do you call that? Her family died at a young age. Her parents were passed before she was grown up, you know. So I don't really know anything about my mother's, you know, European side of that family. I only really know about my father's side of the family. So as far as my family roots are concerned, you know, I've always identified as Puerto Rican because of my name, because of my family and who I hung out with, and my mother adopting my father's family. And boy, everybody said my mom cooked the best Puerto Rican food than even any of my Puerto Rican aunts and grandma and everything, man, and grew up on all that yumminess. But culturally speaking too, it was different. And even though, you know, most of my family, they would identify as Boricua or Puerto Rican, they don't really dig too far back into history as far as their Taino roots are all. But that's just a fact. That's what it is. That's where we came from, and including the African roots and including the Spanish roots, okay? But if you were to look at our culture, when I was 10 years old and I went to my father's homeland for the first time, it's the country or the hillside of Jabucoa, okay? And then my whole family lived on this one mountainside. and there was platanos all over there. I'm assuming some of them, and many of them were platano farmers. At this time, of course, people were going into town getting jobs and whatnot, but platanos or plantains all over the hillside. One cow, I don't know who owned it. I was a kid, right? So, but people would go up and milk that cow. There was chickens and things just running freely around. There were no doors on the houses of my family's homes back then. There was just it was concrete houses opening over. I think some of my family might have still had outhouses back then, you know, and they just had mosquito nets over their beds. So it was an open air living environment. Really, really precious, beautiful, beautiful. Lots of mosquitoes over there though, so they had the mosquito nets draped over their beds. But open air all day long, you know what I mean? You lived with the coqui frogs, you lived with the, you know, the little critters and the lizards all over your house. And it's just the way my family lived. And everybody was welcome into each other's home. It was like a village, you know? You could walk over to this house and there was like one TV. You know, we didn't come from money. It wasn't like a wealthy family thing. We were country people, you know, and had that very indigenous vibe to it, at least from my interpretation. And my great grandma, man, she was like 4 foot something, little man. And when we got into town, they harvested an animal to celebrate us being there, and everybody, the whole mountainside, everybody shared it. It was very celebratory, very festive family, you know, or culture, I should say, very festive culture, and didn't have much but shared everything. Okay, big families. It was very common for 2 brothers to share a twin bed. You know, I mean, even popular Boricua people like Miguel, you know, he shared a bed with his brother when he was an adult, you know, things like that. You know, these are common cultural things that you don't see here. And it was just very rich and very beautiful. And looking back at it now, you can really see how, you know, those indigenous roots still were there. And yeah, our family was Catholic at the time, and that was kind of a thing where you were sort of back in the 1600s or whenever that was, you were forced into that whether you wanted to or not, and you had to adopt that in order to survive. There was a time where the Taino revolted against the Spanish, and they lost, and so the Spanish basically said you have to renounce your culture and become Catholic and whatever, get baptized, I think it was. And if they didn't, they were killed right there. That was way what the reservation concept that we got over here in the States was actually the lesser of the evils when it came to some of the choices the indigenous people had of early settling. So anyway, but you know, I'm proud of my culture. I'm proud of what I know of my culture. I'm proud of my heritage, and sort of the richness that I'm still learning today, but experiencing. And so I feel really happy about making this flute that symbolizes where I come from, and maybe this answers questions some people wonder. This is the age of cultural appropriation and all the other things that we're evolving to understand better, you know, and we have to be careful, because when we adopt these more liberal concepts, which to me is evolution. It's necessary. It's a beautiful thing when we're learning about you know, finding equity, equal rights, all the things that we're looking for in this world. But we tend to go a little extreme when we're making this process. Do you know what I mean? And so we can't forget that there's a lot to still learn about each other and about each other's cultures and heritage. And we should probably slow down before we stereotype and decide that we know about things that are they're very detailed. You know what I mean? When we talk about race, when we talk about culture or cultural appropriation or things, or who has the right to do what these days, or who's taking something from another person, we have to really, really take a little step back for a minute, and also remember that a lot of cultures, and most indigenous cultures that I know, they want to share their culture. They want to share it. They don't feel like necessarily it's all for them. And, you know, there is a line that we have to learn, but we have to be careful when we stereotype people and assume we know all the things when we probably know just a little bit. So anyway, I guess that's all. I just wanted to share a little bit about my culture, and I hope that, I don't know, hope it's inspiring to you or whatever, and I hope that you can do that for yourself, you know, understand a little bit about your culture and where you come from, and your roots, and I have a lot of digging to do about all of my ancestry if I wanted to look at all of them, but yep, my Puerto Rican ancestry is something that I really get into. So anyway, take care, y'all. I'm going to play you a little music. I hope you like it. This flute in the background is actually the flute that's this one here, this Taino flute that I'm playing. I'm going to play a little bit more here. Okay.